Hello and welcome to Vikings and Muses, conversation between a man and woman about everything in society. I'm Dylan Bain, and joining me as always is
Anya Shack. Hi, everybody.
fantastic. Um, so we were kind of casting about for a topic, and I think one of the things that has been on my mind is it kind of relates to where we started yesterday. Not yesterday, but the last time we chatted about. We started off talking about population collapse. So I was thinking about this and this question that we have kind of kicked around on like, the first culture of people that will go extinct are white liberals because they're not having kids. So the question that came to me recently was, do we have an obligation to have kids? Like, is that something in society? So like,
Mm.
society continues to change and move and morph. And so like I'm always kind of fascinated by the question of what is societal obligation and to what level are we actually beholden to it?
It's a really good question. Hmm. That's a very good question. Um, do you have thoughts, or do you want me to start?
I would love you to start because I have an avalanche of ideas in my head. So
I'm sure you do. I don't have an avalanche of ideas, but I have just initial gut reaction to that question, which is, what are our obligations as a society? Probably varies depending on like school of thought, like moral thought, philosophical way of life. I think that's it just makes me think of all the philosophers that we study, and how each of them kind of represents like a way of life. And then I would say that the answer to that question probably differs for each of them.
hmm.
Um, but if we're speaking straight evolutionary obligation, and if we are just talking from that lens, then absolutely yes, we have an obligation to have kids.
Hmm. It's interesting you bring up a school of thought. I always kind of think of like humans tend to like we cluster, right? Like we create societies, we create cultures, we create different things, um, like different in groups with different languages and different ways of dress. Like you can see this in high schools, you can see this in society writ large. Like, think of a conservative and think about what they look like in your head. Think about a liberal and think about what they look like in your head. Like we know what the uniform here looks like.
Yep.
And I kind of think that there's got to be similarities between societies, like what actually bounds them, like common language, common values, so on and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. And I think the question of like kids is hard because we've spent a lot of energy and time explaining to people like, hey, why is you're free to do whatever you want and kids are a burden. And
Mm-hmm.
like when I talk to women in my circle, a lot of them are like, yeah, no one should tell me I should have kids. And on the other hand, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
but you have unilaterally decided to end your bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
Like that
Mm-hmm.
you made that choice 20 years ago and now you're following through on it. And I just I it kind of plagues me because to me I look at it and be like, no society can actually survive unless we have kids. Like we
Oh
don't we
yeah.
don't continue. Like
Oh yeah.
this I've recently listened to an interview with a guy who was arguing that like this is a really complicated way of committing suicide by devaluing motherhood and pushing out the idea of having family. And I find that argument repulsive but strangely compelling.
Yeah, I find it pretty compelling too. You know, the narrative around children being a burden is, I think it's just a psychological, I mean, it's a bit of psychological warfare, in my opinion. I think it's just so devoid of any real innate connection that we have as humans to our parents and then the desire to have children. And I think we're so that that desire of ours is so animalistic, and it's so just natural, and it's so, I mean, if you believe in God, God given. I think the children are a burden thing is just, it's like a moot point if you're thinking about humanity and life from the natural perspective. But if you're thinking about it from the technological perspective and from thinking about like the end of the world and all of the like very anti-human stuff that you talk about, then yeah, it makes sense. So yeah, I'd like to think about life in a more natural way as often as possible, but it's really hard to do these days.
Yeah, it's a bit of political philosophy at the end of the day. Like we're using population collapse, but this could be to anything, right? To how much are children beholden to their family culture, right? How much are kids beholden to their hometown? You know, and like for myself personally, like knowing where I stand politically is very different than the rest of my family. And you know, there's always the joke of like, oh, Dylan's the one who left, right? I left my hometown, and my whole family's still there.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been thinking a lot about that with like the passing of my grandma recently. My youngest daughter just had a birthday yesterday. You know, and like looking at all of these things of like, what is it that I'm expecting from her, and what is it that my family's continuing to expect from me.
Yeah.
Knowing like my parents stayed in my hometown to take care of their parents until they passed, you know, whereas I'm a 16-hour drive if I don't stop away from mine.
Totally. It's really interesting. There's like kind of this just brings me back to collectivistic cultures versus individualistic cultures, which is the difference between places like China and Russia versus America and like Canada. So I think, you know, there's a lot of validity in the narrative that's alive right now, which says something like, and I know you've said this too before, Dylan, it's like, you don't owe your parents anything. Like, let alone if they were a bit traumatizing for you, right? And let alone if they were really hurtful to you, and then you went on and did all this work to like escape the paradigm that you were brought up in. You're in a new paradigm. You don't want anything to do with your parents because you want to live a healthier life. You don't owe them anything. But you'd argue that once you've gone through that healing process, you don't owe them anything. There's still this level of like connection where you want to help them. You want to make sure everything's okay for them. There's like, it's like the collectivist draws you back to like want to maintain some sort of fluidity and connection, and to take the good, to remember what was good there and to kind of bring that forth. So I think what I'm just saying is like, there's a lot about, it doesn't matter, you do you, like family doesn't matter. Whereas I think that's what's making so many people depressed.
Ooh, tell me more. Expand on the depression part. That's the part that hits for me.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't have as many depressed people in non-Western countries across the world. It's just not a thing. There are obligations. There is so much connection with family. You have so many obligations to family every day that you don't have time to be depressed. You don't sit alone for hours like you do in the West. You're part of this community, and yes, sometimes boundaries aren't really a thing in those kinds of communities, but depression isn't really a thing either. And so there might be a little bit of trauma. There might be some toxic ways of relating. Sure, of course, but not depression. And so I think, you know, it's a game. Like for me, for myself, like this was kind of like growing up Russian American, like first generation. There was some toxic shit in my family, and I really wanted to individuate. I really wanted to go away. And at 18, I left, and I was like, I'm gonna find my own thing. But it's been hard. Like even 5 years ago, I remember like sitting down one day and just being like, God, I feel so lonely, so lonely, so lonely. Like you're nothing like your parents anymore because you've individuated so much, but you don't have kids yet. and so you're just this like island. That's not common in the East. Like, people don't do that. So I think that's why I feel like this. I felt this draw to kind of go back home and like rekindle and re-relate to my family as a healthier person. But yeah, so I do think that like in this push in the West to like not need anyone, to do it ourselves, to kind of break free from any sort of like shackle that a family member might put on you, we've created a lot of depression.
It's interesting. So yes, I agree with you that the the individuation creates a lot of arts and crafts for people, because like once you're unmoored, like you have to go through the process of defining yourself. Like this is why strong culture and like religious communities specifically are like they have an advantage of it's already been thought for you. Here's the template, just go live it.
Yeah.
And at the same time though, like I think about my experiences in Taiwan, where I was teaching in an international school. You had a lot of very wealthy kids, and a lot of them had the same, like they were still a community, but they also had a lot of different stressors too. And now that you're as you were talking, I was thinking, I was like, oh wait, hold on a second. A lot of those kids didn't live in the density of the city. They lived in their version of the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
But when they were at school, we used to joke that they would be like, you'd be walking down the stairs and there's like a pile of boys. Like they would just all be like in contact, like as if you just like tossed them in the corner, and they would just be there and talking and joking, and that's something that we just wouldn't do as Western people. But I wouldn't say there wasn't as much depression, but it was a very different stripe, because the ones that would get to the lock themselves in a room and not come out type of depression like you hear about in Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, I'm still like wrestling with that one. It's almost like the depression is like it's almost like different. Like I'm not sure what the existential crisis that is happening in Japan is all about. Like I want to know more about that. I think in the States it's a little bit more of just like we're fatigued, our food is shitty, we're fat, we're not moving, we're alone, we drive all the time. Like it's kind of like environmental too.
Totally.
So I think it's probably different. I'd like to know more about that.
Well, one of my mentors, Dewey, he always talks about like when you try to design an environment, you end up undesigning it for nature, and how like that's not how it's supposed to be. Like how many of us can go out and could, if we even wanted to, go out and catch fireflies? I haven't seen a firefly in like 25 years.
I don't think I've seen one in a long time. Yeah.
Exactly. Like I remember I used to, when I would drive my car, like the entire windshield would end up splattered with bugs. I haven't seen that in 20 years. So like that's not okay. Like,
when did that just happened to me recently? Oh, it was in Spain. Of course. It was in Spain.
Tell me more.
There were like, but I remember like feeling like, why is there stuff like coming into the window? Like there's just, what's going on outside? And then I was like, oh, these are bugs. Mm-hmm. Like I was just like, oh, I didn't realize. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like when I was 18, I took a road trip where I drove through Iowa, and like they had like this special stuff that you could put into your windshield wiper fluid to get the bugs off. Yeah. I drove through Iowa a year ago, and I didn't have one bug splatter the whole time. So like, I wonder like how much of it is that we've increasingly become like a lion in the cage at the zoo, completely separated from everything around us.
I know, it breaks my heart. It really does. How about that was the thing on the news, this like plane crash, right? Like however many 30 days ago, and apparently like 4 kids were left alive. They were surviving in the wilderness for like 40 days.
That's
and like
incredible.
one of them was a baby. It was like 2 boys, a girl, and a tiny baby.
Incredible.
Like, insane.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I gotta wonder if, like, did instinct take over on some levels?
Right.
Like,
I wonder because
did the plane crash and they were like, oh, I recognize this? Like,
totally. I think Jordan Peterson really makes a good point. He's just like always talking about how resilient we are. Like there is so much chaos going on in the world, yet we manage to like make things happen and like the trains still run on time most of the time and like we're very resilient people and I think if some crazy tragedy went down in any of our lives, I think instinct would kick in. I'd like to think so.
yeah, I mean that's Jack Donovan's point with his four tactical virtues of masculinity. It's
Yeah.
what would because what he'll say is his contribution to the masculinity space is the gang theory of masculinity.
Yeah.
Men look for what would make good gang members. Strength, courage, mastery, honor.
Yeah.
But he also talks about like this idea of the empire of nothing, right? Like this malaise that comes in where we're all increasingly standardized into one template or another.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this last night, when I was out walking at night, and the idea of like, why is it that like the South Koreans' birth rate is just falling off a cliff, and the Chinese and the Iranians and like that all their birth rates have fallen off a cliff, and I think what I've come to is like, I was pulling up data last night, so just bear with me for a second.
Yeah.
But those birth rates started to fall the second they started you're really doubling down on industrialization.
Yeah.
And so like part of me wonders if what we didn't export, like, because a lot of that started occurring, like really hardcore started occurring when we were outsourcing so much of our manufacturing capacity to places like South Korea and Japan. And I wonder if one of the things we didn't also export at the same time, in addition to those jobs and capacity, was also the idea that like, oh, you should be individualistic, and oh, you hey women, like you need to get an education, and your first and last goal is to have a good career, because that would make sense, right? Because the more you do that, the bigger the workforce, the lower the wages. So it's not to say that there's an evil like conspiracy, but like that's just a byproduct of what goes on when you're bound to look to your next quarterly report. It seems to make sense.
Yeah.
And there's an uncomfortable part of me that's like it makes more sense than I want it to. Let's just put it that way.
Totally. Makes a lot. Yeah, I totally get that. I think, unfortunately, for us and just humanity in general, we are so bad at playing the long game, Like, we are just so obsessed with the short game. And like, oh, we need more workers. Oh, we need to raise profits. Great. Let's get women in here. Let's do this. Let's set up daycare so that children can be looked after by the government so parents can work. And I just think, like, what a lack of foresight. Like people are so depressed. People are so lonely. People are so suicidal. There's no community, really. You have to forge it. People are way less religious than they used to be. It's just, I think, like, I just, to not play the long game and say, like, we need to focus on having children. We need to pedestalize motherhood. We need to make sure these women and everybody around them feels excited that they're not going to be working for X amount of years while they raise their children. Like, the fact that we don't do that is just, I don't know. It's like immoral in my opinion. It's all profit driven.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot because like I'm raising two girls to be women, right? Like, and like, what am I raising them for? Like, what am I trying to instill in them? What's the end result that I'm going for with a lot of this? And to do I say to them like, hey, part of your function in this world is to find a good partner and settle down and have kids. Or do I not? Do I follow what is the success? What the rest of society is telling them, which is, focus on your career, focus on your career, focus on your career. And I don't have a good answer to that. Because on the one hand, I don't want to tell my daughters what they have to do. On the other hand,
Yeah.
it's a question of like, what is the obligation here? But here's a question for you: do you really think that do you think that it's the humans are short-term thinkers, or is it the cultures that we've existed in are short-term cultures? Like, did our short-term cultures
Yep.
eradicate the ones who thought the long game?
Yeah. Right. Yes. The latter for sure. I think the second thing you said, we're living in short-term cultures. That's absolutely right, because I can't. I'm going to butcher this, but like the Native American proverb. I'm not sure where this comes from, but I definitely love this one, and it goes something like, "We don't inherit our earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children."
It's the seventh generation concept, right?
What is that?
Every choice we make as a group should be considering the seventh generation beyond us.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that
Yeah,
a lot.
but like you'd be looked at as insane.
I would be looked at as insane, but that's it. I mean, I think we should. So much of what happens in society, I think, is insane. Yet everyone buys into it, and like these things that I feel are like absolutely normal and should be thought about and should be discussed, are looked at as insane. And I also think like so many indigenous cultures like believe in this like circular life of where like time isn't linear but it's circular, and so it's like that's a little more, up there, out there. It's a little more spiritual, but I think there's something beautiful in it. I mean, if life is circular, then we're not going anywhere. There's nowhere to race to. Like, we should just, embrace this moment and build something beautiful so that we can have beauty and so that our kids can have beauty and they can have beauty 200 years from now. So, yeah.
Yeah, have you ever read the book Ishmael by Daniel Quinn?
No, I think I've heard of it though. Ishmael, right?
So right there, highly recommend you read it.
All right.
It was a huge. I read it back in college, and it's
Okay.
it's one of those books that like echoes in my head all the time. But he makes this point of like, when you have technological and industrial advance,
Yeah.
like, things stop being the same,
Yeah.
right? And as a result, short-term thinking is
Yeah.
all that counts, because you don't know what 7 generations in the future is going to look like. And so his
Yeah.
point was like, you went from this society where, like I'll take my ancestors for example. On my mom's side, my grandmother, on my mom's side, her parents were from the Alsace-Lorraine region of France
Yeah.
or Germany, depending on what area you're looking at. And several years ago, we sent a couple of my cousins over there to go like check it out and see what it was like. And there were people with our last name that looked like they belonged at our family reunion, like walking around.
Wow.
And like some people would like look like there were people in the village who were like, "What's going on?
Wow.
Like, where is this person?" And then they started talking. They're like, "Oh, you're one of the Dylan Schneiders." Blah blah blah. Like, and like they ended up in the newspaper, and they like did a like little festival for them. Like, it was this weird thing. But the point is that there's still people there, and they've been there for 600 years.
Yeah.
Like they've been in this, they settled in this area. Like, their ancestors like arrived sometime after Caesar. Right?
Wow.
And so like you think about that, like when you are so static in an area and be like, this is our land, this is our place. Yeah. You can think for the seventh generation.
Yeah.
My family got through 3 generations in Kenosha before my generation fled.
Yeah. That's so real. I don't know what it's like to feel so connected to a place in that way. I think that must be. It's funny, I meet a lot of Brazilians, like in life, and Brazilians are super connected to their place. They're like, Brazil is it, like nowhere else, and I think it's really interesting. So I wonder if it's like, it depends on the culture and the personalities and like just like what the values are or something, I guess, of a group of people, because plenty of other groups are not so committed to their location, you know, like they can move and it's not such a big deal. I don't know. I find that to be really inspiring. Like I can't think of a place that's like, I mean, maybe Jerusalem, where I would feel like, where I did feel like this kind of connection to the earth in that way. But yeah, I think I got on a tangent. Sorry.
No, it's good. I mean, I've been talking to my brother. My brother lives in Canada, and we've been talking to him a little bit about how, like, I suddenly feel this draw back to where I grew up, and I'm not sure why. Right, like I used to have like this deep affinity with Wisconsin and Wisconsin culture, and the culture there is very different than other parts of the United States, and then it kind of faded. Like, as I was gone and as I was out of, I moved around a bunch. It all faded away, and then I've been feeling like unmoored. And then lately, it's been like I have this like strong desire to live near Lake Michigan again. You know,
I think it makes sense. I think it's just a reflection of the times, though, too, and like just things are a bit chaotic. Things are there's a lot of just overwhelm with life, and I do think that like going back to your roots and like heritage is it feels safe and emotionally fulfilling.
Let me ask you this, and you know, your family's closer to the, you know, for lack of a better term, old world than mine is.
Yeah.
But I remember I was having a conversation with a guy, and we're going back like a decade now. But I was saying, he was like, well, where are you from? And I was like, well, originally I'm from Wisconsin, but my family's from Germany and from Ireland. And he was like, no, you're not. You're not German or Irish. and he was like, you have no relation to that place. And he was making the argument of like, it's kind of weird for Americans to be like, well, what are you? Oh, I'm German. Like, no, you're not. You don't speak German. You don't have any German values. So like, as somebody who's closer to the old world, like, what do you think about that concept?
Yeah, I've thought about this many times.
Good. I'm super excited now.
I'll share a story that kind of solidified this for me. I was waiting tables in New York, and I was working at this hotel, and it was a fun job. And then we had family meal. So when you wait tables, those that haven't done that before, and you wait tables, especially at hotels or bigger restaurants, they always have like a meal that's made for the employees that has nothing to do with the actual food that's served at the restaurant. Family meal. And so I remember there was just like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but somebody was responsible for the family meal that was like Dominican heritage, okay? And one of the American guys said something like, "Oh, it's like 7 a.m. Like, I don't want to eat like tortillas and like beans and all this stuff. Like, I want to eat eggs." And the woman said something like, "Well, look, too bad for you. Like, this is Dominican Day at this restaurant or something." And then someone, I remember, asked her, "Oh, are you Dominican?" And then she was like, "Yep, I'm Dominican." And I even remember there was a reference around like being Dominican American, and she said, "Nope, I'm just Dominican." And as it turns out, this woman has never been to the Dominican Republic and does not speak Spanish. There was a grandmother that arrived maybe from the Dominican Republic, maybe. Could have been from somewhere else. Who knows? But she has just identified with this culture because she's in New York. There's plenty of Dominican neighborhoods, whatever the reasoning was. And in that moment, I was just like, God damn, we have lost the patriotism in this country. We really have. It's really sad when people behave that way. And I like don't stand for it. That's why when people ask me like, what am I these are my levels. I'm always like, hey, I'm Anya, I'm from Texas. And then if they really want to get to know me, it's like, oh yeah, I'm Russian American, right? I'm first generation Russian American. And then if they really want to, if like I'm actually going to talk to them for more than 10 minutes, then it's like, okay, yeah, I was born in Azerbaijan, etc. I'm Jewish, all these things. but I feel strongly that I'm an American. I have citizenship, like, even though I wasn't born here. And if we all would adopt that mentality, we might be a little more united.
I 100% agree with you. Like,
Yeah.
everything you said is absolute music to my ears.
Good.
Like,
So I agree with that
sincerely.
dude. I totally agree with that dude. Yeah.
Well, like when I moved to Taiwan, like that was a huge thing that people would. It's interesting because like I went out for the hiking group and there was like, hey, like we got a lot of international people here. Like let's just go around and introduce your name and where you're from. And so it was like, hi, I'm so and so from South Africa and I'm from Singapore and blah blah. Comes to me and I'm like, yeah, hi, I'm Dylan. I'm from the U.S. And the guy next to me goes, yeah, my name's Brett. I'm from Texas. It was like. He didn't say the United States. He said Texas.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hilarious. He would. Of course Brett would do that. Yeah.
Totally. But it's one of those things where like no one cared that I was from Wisconsin. Like no one cared. My accent was close enough to the US standard that no one really recognized it. And I lost it pretty quick too, but that's where at the point where I was like, no, I'm American. And people were like, well, aren't you German? No, I'm not. Like, don't get me wrong, I love me some polka and I like bratwurst, but like that's about where it ends.
Totally. And I love that. Like you can have pride for like your heritage and your ancestry, and that's totally fine, but don't label yourself that. It's like you don't live there.
Yeah, my biggest thing with the pride in heritage thing though is like, what did you bring over from that?
Right.
Right? Like,
good point.
What is the thing that you're doing now that would be unrecognizable to somebody not in that heritage? And we used to joke that it's the volume of alcohol my family consumes. Marcus is Irish for sure, but you know, we don't have that, right? Like the food is at my one grandma's house was the same as it's very similar to the food at my other grandma's house. There were some minor differences, but it was never really that different. They were so Americanized.
It's a great question that I like that you're talking about this because it's a great question for me. Like, what's important to me that like I'd like for my great grandchildren to keep going? Like that would be like not that they would have to do anything, but like what would be cool if they kept going? It's a great question. I don't even know off the top of my head. Probably some food-related things. Probably the New Year's tree. Not Christmas tree, but the New Year's tree. So just some different, like some Russian things that we do. But yeah, I'm not so sure about what else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a serious question for me to say if you celebrate your heritage, like what is it that you're celebrating? And I think about that again frequently because like my wife's family is all from Lebanon, right? But they don't speak Arabic,
right?
Like they all have this like strong Lebanese like pride thing going on, and their food is emphatically different, right? Like you walk over and you'll walk in and you'll be like, oh, are you staying? It's like, no, I'm just dropping off the kids. And like, well, you should eat, and then they pull out like 400 grape leaves. Or dolmas, depending on how you.
Oh my god, I love dolmas so much.
And then pretty soon, like they got the kibbeh pans out, and it gets wild. But like, other than that, they most of their life is standard U.S.
Yeah, man, that's it. That's right. That's true. So, I wish people would unite a little more. It's like, we came here, we're citizens. Let's do the American thing.
Yep. Everyone go get a pickup truck and a gun and let's make this happen.
Let's have burgers. Let's do it.
Yeah. A burger and fries from McDonald's in your Ford F-150 with your AR-15. Like, go full America. Gotta have the American flag on the back of it, and you have to be shooting fireworks as you drive down the street, right?
Yep. Perfect. Great. Actually, since moving to Texas... Oh, no, go ahead.
No, by all means, please, because I was going to continue that thread.
Oh, this is just a tangent. Since coming back to Texas, it's just insane how many people have trucks. Like, everyone has a truck, of course. Everyone has a truck. And if you don't have a truck, you're not part of the club. And the other fun thing about people with trucks is it's almost like there's a rule. There's like an unspoken rule that if you own a truck, you can't pull into spaces. You have to back into them. Okay? And that takes triple the amount of time. So every time I'm in like parking garages and I'm trying to park, there's a truck in front of me. I'm just like the death stare. I'm just like, you are just backing into this spot just because like you think you can. And it's just so annoying. It's the biggest pet peeve of mine. Truck drivers backing into spaces and wasting my time.
What if they had a Nissan Sentra? Is it still annoying if they back into spaces with a Nissan Sentra?
If they do it really fast, it's fine. But with a truck, it takes longer.
Well, that's fair. My Sentra is very small. I can do it in one shot. But I do back into every parking space I go into.
But I don't understand why people back into spaces. I don't understand it.
I mean, for me, there's two reasons for me. Number one, it was ingrained into my head that is how you park a car. Especially when I was in the security force, every car you had to be backed in.
Huh?
Like if you pulled in, so that you could, it was less dangerous to pull out.
Oh, okay.
Like it's easier to get out of a spot. That's why like even because I work in power utilities, every truck we have has to be backed into the spot is company policy.
Well, I don't know how to back into a spot, so.
Well, but that's why it is for me. I think it is for a lot of other people just to look cool, right?
Yeah, it's totally to look cool. Totally. So, anyway, that's that. We can move on.
Well, I mean, like my picking on pickup trucks is famous at this point of how silly I think that they actually are, and my supreme annoyance is how they're treated from a regulatory standpoint in the United States.
Yeah,
so,
that's true. That's actually true.
But like even that comes down, brings us right back to the same question though of like, to what level do you have to as a societal obligation that if you're going to drive this monstrous truck, that like if you're going to park, like go and you want to back in, like go somewhere where you're not going to inconvenience somebody else, or does their individual right to back in trump the social cost of delaying everybody's time?
That's such a good point. Meanwhile, like, definitely want to be in a truck if you're in the country. Like, you don't want to not be in a truck. You want a truck. So it's just, life is complex, man. Life is complex. I think it's silly to have a truck in an urban center, but I think having a truck in a rural, wide open space is fine. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is how utilitarian. I guess not utilitarian. I guess pragmatic would be a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Unless you actually have a good reason to have a truck, like I don't understand. For me, the cost never actually works it out. People are like, well, "What if you got to haul something?" Then I go rent a trunk from the Home Depot. Like I haul stuff all the time.
Yeah.
I garden a ton. I do a lot of work around my house. I do a lot of work around other people's houses. So if I've got to move materials, I just spend $20 for an hour with the pickup truck from Home Depot.
Dude, it's totally all about projecting big dick energy. That's what a truck is for.
Does it work? Because to me, I just look at it and be like, nice truck. Sorry about your penis. Like,
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like now I'm like I don't know, I'm like jaded now because I don't even see every man I meet, I expect them to have a truck. You know what I'm saying? Because at this point, like I remember going on a date like a couple months ago and I was just like going back to our cars from the restaurant and I was like, "Oh, is that your car?" He was just like, "Of course." It's like, of course he has a truck. Like, why would he have any other type of car? So I don't even know anymore.
I feel slightly judged. I haven't had a truck since 2011 is when I sold my truck.
Meanwhile, if I was in like the UK or if I was in Spain, I would not be thinking about men and trucks. I would not be equating the two things together because no man has a truck there. So,
totally. But they're a much more human-focused society.
They are.
They're much more focused on actually being in community with each other, which is why a lot of them still have like music and pubs and dancing and third spaces to be in.
So then, isn't like aren't rural communities really all about like each other and community and like, so what's the disconnect there?
So I've heard them say that that's them, and
Yeah.
I've worked a lot out in rural communities, and I've never experienced what they talk about. Like they all
I
say they
see.
do that, but it doesn't. I know, like next week I'll be in Cadott, Wisconsin. If you can find that on a
Yeah.
map, good luck. Like,
Yeah.
so it's rural. Like there are three towns: Cadott, Boyd, Stanley. They're these small towns, the small rural towns. You go walk through the center. There's no one there.
Hmm.
You go into the bar, the bowling alley that's been there since 1920 something, and be like,
Hmm.
"Hey, how's it going?" We always like, "Well, no, it's not. No, fewer people this year than last." Like that guy's
Oh,
been the
wow.
guy who's been slinging drinks there has told me that every year for a decade. That the number of people who come into his bar have been dwindling, and he's even got a bowling alley on the side of it. So like,
So what are
I
they
don't I
doing?
don't
What are these
see
people
it
doing?
sitting in their houses.
Because like you have this impression that like everyone like drops in on their neighbors without calling first. Everyone takes over like casseroles. Everyone's like all up in each other's business. Like everyone knows each other. Everyone like meets up at the pub on Friday nights. It's just that's the impression I get. It's a very romanticized picture that I have in my mind. I guess what you're saying to me is it's not living up to that in the community you're talking about.
Well, I think the actual sad truth is that 20 years ago it still was there,
Yeah.
and it slowly died off, right? Like, and I can point to like Eagle River is a great example of. I mean, I can name a bunch of towns in Wisconsin where I've worked at periods of time in my life, right? And they
Yeah.
all seem to suffer from the same problem. Their youth all leaves to go find
I
jobs.
see.
And so the
Jobs.
people who are
Right,
left
right.
over are people like my grandparents, because like my
Right.
grandpa used to go up to our family's land in northern Wisconsin, and he'd go out down to the VFW, and they would know people, and then every year they dwindle until eventually the person who dwindled was my grandpa. Well, I'm not going to go to the VFW. Like,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So the kids leave. The kids leave. That's such a great insight. I don't know how to make them stay or how to inspire them to want to stay.
well, I do think that there is a sense, I think on both the left and the right, that something's wrong. Right? Something is wrong. Like we've lost hope, we've
Yeah.
lost identity, we seem to be drifting, and I really think that that's a big part of it. Is that the youth is leaving. There's fewer kids around, and without kids there is no future.
Yeah.
So,
It's
and
really
with,
true.
with and that really
are
sunny
everything.
note, I think that's where we should leave it.
Kids are the future. Yeah,
All right.
you're so right.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.